Aubrey. Do you remember a few weeks ago when I had you read me a story and then I asked you some questions and I learned about you and how you can read?
Mm-hmm.
Today we're going to kind of do the same thing, except I'm going to read to you and I'm going to have you use this paper and these crayons to draw what I'm reading to you.
Okay.
So you'll be like the illustrator.
Okay.
The book I chose today is Because of Winn-Dixie by Kate DiCamillo.
Okay.
All right? Does that sound like a good plan?
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to read the whole book. We're just going to read chapter 1 today.
Okay.
So, chapter 1. My name is India Opal Bologna, and last summer my daddy, the preacher, sent me to the store for a box of macaroni and cheese, some white rice, and 2 tomatoes. And I came back with a dog. Do you know what a preacher is, Aubrey?
Like a minister of religion.
Yeah, it talks to people in the church about God and Jesus and things in the Bible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is what happened. I walked into the produce section of the Winn-Dixie grocery store to pick out my 2 tomatoes, and I almost bumped right into the store manager. He was standing there all red-faced, screaming and waving his arms around. Why do you think he was red-faced and screaming?
Because he was mad.
I would say because he was probably mad. Who let a dog in here? He kept on shouting. Who let this dirty dog in here? At first, I didn't even see a dog. There were just a lot of vegetables rolling around on the floor, tomatoes and onions and green peppers, and there was what seemed like a whole army of Winn-Dixie employees running around waving their arms just the same way that the store manager was waving his. And then the dog came running around the corner. He was a big dog and ugly, and he looked like he was having a real good time. His tongue was hanging out, and he was wagging his tail. He skidded to a stop and smiled at me. I had never before in my life seen a dog smile, but that's what he did. He pulled back his lips and he showed me all his teeth. Then he wagged his tail so hard he knocked some oranges off a display and they rolled everywhere, mixing in with the tomatoes and onions and green peppers. The manager screamed, "Somebody grab that dog!" The dog went running over to the manager, wagging his tail and smiling. He stood up on his hind legs. You could tell that all he wanted to do was get face to face with the manager and thank him for the good time he was having in the produce department. But somehow he ended up knocking the manager over. And the manager must have been having a bad day because lying there on the floor right in front of everybody, he started to cry. The dog leaned over him, real concerned, and licked his face. "Please," said the manager, "somebody call the pound." "Wait a minute," I hollered. "That's my dog. Don't call the pound." All the Winn-Dixie employees turned and looked at me, and I knew I had done something big. And maybe stupid too. But I couldn't help it. I couldn't let that dog go to the pound. "Here, boy," I said. The dog stopped licking the manager's face and put his ears up in the air and looked at me like he was trying to remember where he knew me from. "Here, boy," I said again. And then I figured that the dog was probably just like everybody else in the world, that he would want to get called by a name. Only I didn't know what his name was. So I just said the first thing that came into my head, and I said, "Here, Winn-Dixie." And that dog came trotting over to me just like he had been doing it his whole life. The manager sat up and gave me a hard stare, like maybe I was making fun of him. "It's his name," I said. "Honest." The manager said, "Don't you know not to bring your dog into a grocery store?" "Yes, sir," I told him. "He got in by mistake. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." "Come on, Winn-Dixie," I said to the dog. I started walking, and he followed along me as I went out of the produce department and down the cereal aisle past all the cashiers and out the door. Once we were safe outside, I checked him over real careful, and he didn't look that good. He was big, but skinny. You could see his ribs, and there were bald patches all over him, places where he didn't have any fur at all. Mostly, he looked like a big piece of old brown carpet that had been left out in the rain. "You're a mess," I told him. "I bet you don't belong to anybody." He smiled at me again. He did that thing again, where he pulled back his lips and he showed me his teeth. He smiled so big, it made him sneeze. It was like he was saying, "I know I'm a mess. Isn't it funny?" It's hard not to immediately fall in love with a dog who has a good sense of humor. "Come on," I told him. "Let's see what the preacher has to say about you." And the two of us, me and Winn-Dixie, started walking home. Did you enjoy that chapter? Yeah?
The part that I haven't finished yet.
You haven't finished yet?
No.
Oh, that's okay. You don't have to draw all of it. So what I wanted you to do with this was think about what I was telling you with the story so that you could recall that. Do you know what that means, to recall the story? That means that you're going to use your picture and tell me what you think happened in the story. What do you think happened?
This girl had a dad that was a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And then the preacher told her to go get some food from the market called Winn-Dixie.
Yep.
And then there she found a dog running around, and she said it was hers, even though she didn't know who it belonged to. And then she was trying to call the dog over to tell that to show the dog was hers, but she had she thought it was like all people who wanted to be called by name, so she said, "Here, Winn-Dixie," and the dog came, and then the manager thought she was insulting him, but she just said that's his name.
Mm-hmm.
And then she went back home with the dog to see what the preacher thought about it.
Mm-hmm. And who was the preacher? Do you remember?
Her dad.
Her dad, yeah. So she called out that the dog was her dog. Do you remember why she said the dog was hers when it wasn't?
Because she didn't want the dog going to the pound.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the next time we read, we'll continue on at chapter 2. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you for reading with me.
Yeah.